Hi, I'm Kripa Anand and welcome to the CanadianSME Small Business Podcast. Today we dive into an essential topic for small business owners: strategic growth and the legal foundations needed to scale. For any small business, growth comes with unique challenges and opportunities that require expert guidance. Our guest today, Muneeruddin, is an experienced executive and legal expert in corporate finance, M&A, and venture transactions, and a partner at Pallet Vallo LLP. With his dynamic background in corporate leadership and legal advisory, Mujir brings valuable insights to entrepreneurs at all stages of growth. Join us as we discuss the pillars of scaling a business, the role of strategic legal planning, and common pitfalls to avoid. Mujir, we're thrilled to have you here on the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Of course, it's our pleasure. Now, to begin with, where should we start the conversation from? Every small business owner dreams to scale the business, right? For all the listeners that are listening, there are mix. Some people have already started a business, some are the owners of a medium enterprise. But if we talk about in terms of the long term vision, where do you think businesses should start this conceptualization of scaling in their mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. This is one of those universal questions that's good at any stage, whether you're
Right.
looking to expand, whether you're looking to start a new line of business. The most important thing is you start with the business case.
Hmm.
Too often, people start with the supply side and they think if I can just offer this, if I build it, they will come.
Right.
That's the wrong way of looking at it. I always like to think of an example and talk about how early in my career I had co-founded a law firm. And one of the mistakes that me and my co-founders made was we thought that simply by adding different lines of business, you could actually grow the firm. But the focus should always be actually on cornering revenue.
Right.
So you look at it such that if I add this practitioner, how much revenue is it bringing in? And if you are going to look at it in a forward-looking sense, and you say, look, if I expand these services and these offerings, I can
Right.
get X amount of revenue. You really have to understand when is that revenue coming in and what does that look like? It
Right.
should always be on the business case and the
Revenue focused.
revenue focus. And yeah, you're starting with the market and working backwards. And that's just
Right.
a really good rule of thumb, whether it comes to expansion, new product, new geography.
Right.
That's really important.
That's a very interesting perspective right there. And the example that you gave, amazing. As you already know, Mujir, small business, they play a vital role in our economy, right? They're the heartbeat of Canada's economy. As of December 2021, we have employed 8.2 million individuals. That makes 67.7% of the total private labor force, right? Now, given this significant impact, Mujir, how can small businesses leverage their role in the economy, to drive innovation and especially long-term growth?
That's another important question, and one I think that you kind of have to bifurcate based on the segment that you're talking about. I always like to look at small business in terms of high growth,
Mm-hmm.
tech, things that are looking for the moonshot,
Mm-hmm.
and then your everyday small, medium enterprise, which is the true lifeblood of the economy, your mom and pops and your family business. I actually think, contrary to maybe some of the doomsayers out there in the market nowadays, think that there's a unique opportunity that we might see in the next little while with the trade wars and some of what's happening on the geopolitical side.
Right.
If you recall, in the 80s and 90s, Canada used to have a much stronger sense of mom and pop, small, medium, family owned business. You had a lot
Right.
more boutiques.
Hmm.
And as we became more and more globalized, a lot of these were subsumed by the bigger box retailers, as an example. And I think as we start to, by necessity, deglobalize because of our trading partners in the US, they get more and more aggressive. At least that's how it looks right now. I actually think there's going to be an opportunity for us to not only start reinvesting in the community and focusing on the mom and pop,
Right.
but really start to see a lot more products that are more Canadian sourced and more culturally appropriate.
Right.
Because a lot of the American offerings that we buy,
Hmm.
we actually lose our sense of our own identity and culture,
Right.
right? And so I think there's a unique opportunity there
To make
on-
Canada's own national identity, right?
and I think that's something we've ignored for a long time.
Exactly. Yeah, I would agree.
So that's a good opportunity on that segment side. In terms of the tech and the high growth side, this is not going to be something new for anybody who's been paying attention for the last 6 to 12 months. But I think AI is really the thing that everybody needs to focus on. And not just because everybody's talking about it, but actually because it's the next industrial revolution as I see it. It's going to be what typing was in the 80s or word processing in the 90s. If you
Right.
don't learn how to do it and you don't find ways to make that native to what you do in your everyday life, you're really going to be set back by it. So I think, and if we learn something from NVIDIA and what happened last week, I don't know that the opportunity is in the creation of the AI platform. I think it's more in the implementation and the more the downstream
Hmm.
side of things. But that's kind of how I see it. Although I didn't go to school to be an economist, so don't take my word for it.
Right. Expanding on this, what do you think are the most, common mistakes that you see entrepreneurs make around you? And what advice would you give to listeners? How should they avoid them? On top of your mind, if you could just think of some quick mistakes that you've, seen in your lifetime, your friends make, you yourself made, what are those?
So I will say a lot of these mistakes, the ones that you see the most are well-intentioned. It's that the entrepreneur or the business people forget about things like governance and the paperwork because they're so focused on the business.
Right.
So in some ways, it's a noble mistake to make because you're starting with my core advice that I gave at the beginning, which is start with the product, start with the business, and then you figure everything out later on. And honestly, cost management at an early stage of a business
Hmm.
is paramount. Nothing else really matters. But you do have to find a way to balance some core functions of governance and operational systems at an early stage for a startup. You want to make sure that your key personnel have contracts and documentation, not just because it becomes a legal liability down the road, but because humans operate better and there's less emotional issues when the expectations
Or
and the
less.
deliverables are clear
Right.
and it leaves nothing to the imagination. That's always when humans function their best.
Right.
You can, as we say in the law, good paper makes good friends.
Right.
So that's always a good thing to remember. And that's a common mistake that you see is as high growth enterprises or SMBs get to the next stage of their
Wow.
inflection, they're not either deal ready or they actually neglected to put to paper certain arrangements that will then become magnified at a later stage. For example, you don't have a shareholders agreement. So now you need unanimous approval of all 15 shareholders, half of whom have 1 or 2 shares. It's really a huge ordeal. And the impediments to coming to a deal, whether it's to exit or to bring in another investor, are substantial. So those are all things that you really want to keep in mind at an early stage.
Definitely. I really want to ask you this. At this point, if someone magically appears and gives you a time machine and tells you that, let's go back 20 years and we'll give you a chance to redo something all over again, what is that one thing, business wise, that you would do again?
I honestly would say nothing because
Wow.
everything that I've done, all the mistakes that I've made have culminated in me being here today.
Right.
And a lot of times you make a mistake or you learn something and the process that you went through to get to learning that mistake made you so much stronger
Right.
that it equips you for success later on in something else. So it's kind of like when you play Jenga, you don't know what block you pull out is going to make it all unravel. I don't know what bad experience I had in the past do I tug on that would cause me to not
Actually,
be
a
the
good
person that I
sign that
am.
you're not tugged on any specific event or any incident, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the future, though, there's probably a lot of different opportunities that I will look at differently because of my history,
Right.
but I would never want to go back and change that. It was all meant to be that way. And
That's
and
actually the
worked out.
first time I've gotten this content answer. So I'm feeling very peaceful during this podcast right now. Anyway, thank you so much,
That's not
Mujir.
because my success rate is very high, by the way. It's
Yes,
quite to the
exactly.
contrary.
Without saying yes, that's a given. That was a solid roadmap for growth. It's clear that scaling, it requires both strategy as well as resilience, right? To our listeners, remember, scaling is a journey, not a sprint. It requires both a strategic mindset and the right support to build a resilient business.
Mhm.
Now that we've discussed scaling, let's shift gears slightly and talk about legal best practices, right? Which is so crucial again in navigating growth, with confidence and especially security as well.
Mhm.
Now, legal considerations, they might not be the first thing entrepreneurs think of, right? But a solid legal foundation, it can either make a business or break a business. What do you think are some of the best legal practices, that small business owners should adopt early on in their stage, especially to protect them, themselves, their employees,
Mhm.
everyone involved as they grow?
Yeah. So understanding that you don't want to go too legal too quick, you definitely
Hmm.
want to cost manage. The few things that you certainly want to focus on are shareholders agreement, having an operational agreement among all the key founders, making sure that there's a clear set of parameters around how the company is going to be run. How do you bring in future investment? How do you make decisions?
Hmm.
How do you sell the company? Because the reality is, the later you get into your trajectory as a company, the more
Right.
difficult that becomes to enter into. So that's
Right.
something you never want to ignore. The other point is what I mentioned earlier: key people have employment agreements or
Mhm.
consulting agreements if you want to keep it flexible, which is always a good idea. Another thing is to keep people incentivized. You always want to be thinking about vesting and reverse vesting. If you're giving employees options, if you're giving them equity,
Right.
you really want to think about not giving it all to them up front, not because they don't deserve it, but there's a tendency psychologically for humans, once they feel they've gotten everything they're going to get out of something, they're
To
actually
get a
not
little laid
motivated to
back,
keep going it.
right?
Yeah.
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 That was some invaluable advice, especially for business owners who may not yet understand the full importance of legal structure. But it is very important to understand that you have to start somewhere, right?
Mhm.
So, moving ahead, could you please elaborate on the role of intellectual property for small businesses, particularly those, with innovative products or services?
Yeah. Intellectual property is a bit of a double-edged sword. It's very important for certain businesses. If you're in pharma, certain areas of applied science, the patents are very important. They even go on your balance sheet, and they are a basis upon which you get your valuation to raise capital or sell your company. So there certainly is a place for it.
Mhm.
But you don't want to get into necessarily the Apotex business model where you're amalgamating a bunch of different patents, for example.
Right.
They've mastered that because they have a bunch of patents and they prosecute them. The reason why it works so well for them is because they have a very deep war chest to be able to prosecute the patent. So where I'm going with this is a patent and other forms of intellectual property that are registered
Hmm.
are good, but they're only as good as your ability to prosecute them.
Right.
So this is all my long-winded way of saying the best way to protect your business is always on an as-needed basis. If I'm going to give you information,
Hmm.
I do it within the confines of an NDA, and I only give you as much as you need to do what it
Right.
is that our arrangement needs you to do.
Right.
It doesn't make sense to give you all the secrets of the business.
Right. Because it's
You've
not going
always,
to come in my trajectory of work, right? Anyway. So it's
yep,
extra information which,
keep your
if I
eyes on
get
your
to know.
fries,
Exactly.
always.
Right.
That's
Uh,
the best defense. People keep thinking, I've got an NDA, so now I'm safe, or I've got a patent.
right.
Enforcing those things, that's a whole nother issue that you don't necessarily at an early stage of your growth
Right.
have the resources to be able to
Hmm.
enforce.
Great. And also, I think legal best practices, they aren't just for preventing issues. They also can act as a cornerstone of your business's strength if you do it correctly, right? Next, let's talk about the common legal issues, businesses encounter, especially when working with partners and investors. Now, Mujir, every business faces legal challenges, right, at some point. But knowing what to watch out for can make a big difference. If you already knew what's coming, you'll be prepared, right? What do you think are some of the most, common legal issues that small businesses encounter that you've come through in your journey? And what proactive steps can, entrepreneurs take to mitigate these risks?
First and foremost, you need to understand what you're getting into,
Hmm.
especially on the shareholder or the investor side.
Right.
A lot of times startups don't appreciate that they're really crossing a Rubicon. When you're bringing in that first instance of outside money, there's a whole different level of oversight, intervention into your business, transparency that you are not used to, and is frankly annoying for a lot of people who are used to running their own fiefdom. It's not going to be like that anymore. And Canadian corporate law or business law is generally very pro-investor and not pro-company.
Right.
So there's going to be a lot of shareholder rights, whether it goes to transparency, disclosure, governance, how decisions are made. You can't just make them as though it's your own backyard. These are all things that you really have to think about before you sign that document and bring in that outside capital. So what I always say is understand your target audience. Is it a VC? Is it a family office doing an angel round? Is it friends and family doing a seed round? Are they a strategic? What's their psyche? What's their usual profile? Because then you can negotiate things better.
Right.
And you also understand how they're looking to operate and what sort of involvement they're looking to have. And with that, you really have to think about getting a maximal return on dilution, as I say. You don't want to just get $1 of investment because you're diluting and you're giving up all these other things like oversight, transparency, control in the business. It's imperative that you get some other tangible or intangible benefit. For example, is your investor strategic? Can they bring you mentorship? Can they open up supply lines? Can they open up distribution channels? Those are all very important things where for every $1 that you've diluted, you want to get $4 of utility back.
Right.
I mean, as a general rule of thumb, you want to multiply that as opposed to just getting $1 for $1 of an exchange or investment.
Great. I think that's also a great reminder that being proactive is the key ultimately, right? Often, startups and fast-growing businesses, they may overlook specific risk areas that could majorly impact their growth journey. Now, how do you think should businesses approach partnerships or investor agreements to minimize future disputes? Like, do you think they should, do you support verbal agreements over textual agreements?
What I would say is, this is where I believe you crossed that line, where earlier I was saying that you want to push legals down the road, keep things efficient. The moment you're bringing in outside investors, that's where you want to get the appropriate expertise. You want to have a legal team that knows what they're doing. You want the documentation to be pretty robust because you are bringing in outside people. It's not friends and family anymore. And that is the point at which, as we might say, the ish hits the fan, right? So you want to make sure that you've got the documentation in place and everything is ready to go forward. Because whether it's your legal team or ideally if you have a mentor that can help you through the fundraising process, it's just such a different transition from what most SMBs were used to prior to that point.
Right.
You want to have somebody guiding you on both the legal and the business side. So it's important that you don't take that transition lightly and that you get as much advice and as much help as you can. And that's where it makes sense to start spending some money to bring in the expertise.
Great. That's some incredibly useful advice, I'd say. That's been a fantastic discussion on common legal issues and risk mitigation. Let's take a short break to absorb these valuable insights.
Hey, you think you know UPS? Yeah, that's us. Everybody knows that. You know what you didn't know? This. Okay, try to keep up. Ocean, us. Ground, rail, air, so us. Guess who? Us. Customs cleared, borders cleared, done. Us. Still with me? Wait for it. Boom. Us. Intelligent, automated, fulfillment. Us. Yep. Healthcare too. Digital your thing? Yeah. Well, book it, ship it, track it. You feeling me yet? Yep. That's all us. That's all UPS.
At IHG Hotels and Resorts, we're in the business of you.
We're here to help you plug in.
Connect and recharge.
Make an impression.
And meet with confidence.
With 19 brands built for business,
your business gets even more rewarding.
With an award-winning loyalty program at 6,000 IHG hotels and resorts worldwide.
Welcome back, listeners. Now that we have covered some foundational topics, let's dive into the dynamic world of entrepreneurship and how to approach risk with confidence. Now, let's dive into the topic of entrepreneurship as a whole, right? Now, what defines success and what risks entrepreneurs should embrace to make their vision into a reality? Now, entrepreneurship is all about taking risks, right? But successful entrepreneurs know how to manage those risks effectively. From your perspective, Mujir, what does it mean to take a calculated risk in business? Because if we talk about a risk, you cannot really calculate the risk, right? But still, there's this entire phenomena about calculated risk. Please go on and tell our listeners what this phenomena is and how should they find a balance between, boldness and caution.
Yeah, there's a great American football coach who had this great saying where he said, before you learn how to win, you have to learn how not to lose, right? So you want to eliminate, what he's saying is you want to eliminate the unforced errors. You want to eliminate self-defeat, mistakes that you could have avoided. You want to batten down the hatch on a lot of risk that can be avoided. So in practical terms, you want to control what you can and only leave risk to things that you simply cannot control. For example, market risk, economic risk, those are all things that are outside your control.
Right.
But things like, do you have the proper documentation in place?
Right.
Are you opening too many theaters of business at the same time? Right? You want to be growing in a controlled manner. That's the risk that you can take. But the ones that you want to eliminate are the variables. You want to minimize how many different things that you're doing at once.
Right.
I mean, just recently I had a conversation on a real estate project that I'm heavily involved in, and we're looking to do a partnership with a pretty large institution, and we've got some other potential people that we could add to the mix. What I told my partners in that situation was, I want to keep it very simple and streamlined. I don't want to add, I'm negotiating with this person
Right. So many
for my
layers to
deal,
the
and then I'm going to
right.
negotiate with the counterparty. You want to singularize your risk and make it just about the counterparty, and then you can figure out adding people later on. But you don't want to add, in this situation, I'd effectively be opening 2 theaters of negotiation at the same time. Those are the kind of things that you want to minimize. Focus on a few things, eliminate the risk that you can control,
Right.
and leave the risk purely about the business. And then you'll be in much better shape.
Great. Finding that balance, it's no small feat, right? It's not easy at all. But it can be the difference between a thriving business and the one that's struggling right now. To all our listeners, remember that entrepreneurship is a journey filled with both challenges and triumphs. Embrace each step, learn from every experience, and know that the risks you take today can pave the way for a successful future ahead. Now, lastly, let's talk about the future of entrepreneurship. Where do you see opportunities for small businesses today, and what will your advice be for those who are just starting out? And I'm asking this because I want to get into the mindset where you're coming from, right? Now, the landscape for small businesses, it's constantly evolving. New opportunities, new challenges emerging every year. Given your background, Mujir, and your specific expertise, where do you see the biggest opportunities for small businesses in Canada today?
We kind of touched upon this earlier in terms of the different segments. You've got this SMB, the classic SMB,
Right.
and then you've got the high growth. And I would still stick by that. But what I will add to that is an observation I made when I was recently traveling over the Christmas holidays. And based on a lot of geopolitics that are happening in Jordan when I was there, you had a lot of local products really take off overnight.
Right.
So because they wanted to focus on a concerted basis of buying Jordanian,
Right.
buying local, buying products that were made within the country, overnight you had this cola product called Matrix Cola that just exploded overnight.
Right.
They started chains of restaurants and coffee chains that exploded because they wanted to focus on the domestic local product.
Right.
And in many ways, that's a microcosm of what we're facing here. We've got certain geopolitical headwinds. And if we start focusing on supporting our community and the SMB of Canada, you're going to see a lot of potential prosperity come from that. That's what I would say.
Dear listeners, remember that the journey of entrepreneurship is about continuous growth and adapting to new opportunities. Embrace each challenge as a stepping stone towards building a resilient and thriving business. As we wrap up, Mujir, what is that one final advice you'd offer to aspiring entrepreneurs who are looking to grow their business responsibly and strategically? Now, I know we've covered most of the major advice already in the episode, but for all the listeners, what is that one thing they should do after listening to this podcast? First thing.
The first thing is think long and hard about what you want to do and understand why you want to do it. Understand the objective, the why, and never give up at that point, right? Over time, you'll stick to it. You'll have your objective and you'll have made up your mind that I want to get to a certain point in time in 2 years or 5 years, and always relate it back to your objective. If your objective is to spend more time with family while paying the bills, that's your objective. And you only reevaluate on an interval basis against that objective.
Right.
But you never negotiate when the going gets tough, right? Unless it's going to your core objective. The problem is because you can't trust yourself when you get into the fray, when it's a storm outside. You can't trust your subconscious. Our bodies are, in some ways, and our minds are predisposed to quitting. It's an adaptive mechanism. So when you've made up your mind, as one of my personal heroes, Kobe Bryant, would say, I'm not negotiating with myself in the middle of a game.
Right.
I made up my mind. We signed the contract before the game or before the season even started that we were going to go for it. Now, at the end of the season, you can look back and say, hey, maybe my approach was wrong. But once you've made a decision, you really should not be renegotiating that. And it always comes back to your objective. In his case, he wanted to be the best basketball player. So his objective always aligned with what he was doing, where he wanted to be the best at whatever he was doing. And it's the same for any business owner. Understand why you're doing it. And kind of what I alluded to earlier, there's going to be a lot of things that don't go your way.
Right.
But as long as you find a way to survive, a lot of those skills that you pick up during the lean years will be an absolute asset in the years of plentifulness.
Great. That's some really powerful advice right there, I'd say. Thank you so much, Mujir, for sharing your insights and expertise with us today. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast, and I'm hoping we could do again someday.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
In today's episode, we explored strategic growth and the critical role of legal foresight with our guest, Mujir Muneeruddin. From scaling a business to optimizing risks, Mujir shared valuable insights that every entrepreneur could consider for long-term success. We want to extend our gratitude to our partners, RBC, UPS, IHG Hotels and Resorts, and Google for their unwavering support in empowering small businesses across Canada. Don't forget to visit CanadianSME.ca, where you can subscribe to the Canadian SME Small Business magazine for more such insightful content. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Kripa Anand signing off.